Let me start from the very beginning, because this story didn't begin with betrayal. It began with trust, the kind you don't even realize you're giving away because it feels automatic. She was my cousin, not distant, not someone I barely knew. The kind of cousin who shows up at birthdays, who borrows lip gloss, who sits next to you at family dinners and talks about work like you're equals. So when she asked me to borrow my jacket, I didn't pause. I didn't calculate risk. I didn't think, what if she doesn't give it back? I just said yes. And I wish I could tell you it was because the jacket didn't matter, but that wouldn't be true. It mattered a lot. Not because it was expensive, it wasn't. No brand name anyone would recognize. No logo screaming for attention. But it was mine in a way that's hard to explain unless you've ever had one of those pieces. The kind that fits like it was made for your body. The kind you don't replace because you can't. I'd found it years ago after trying on so many others that almost worked but never quite did. I paid to get the sleeves tailored. I replaced the buttons myself after one cracked. I wore it through seasons of my life that changed me. I'm forgetful. Always have been. And I've also had clothes mysteriously vanish at gatherings before. So I have this habit, a quiet, slightly embarrassing one, of sewing a tiny cloth label into my nicer things, just on the inside. My first name, the year, crooked stitches because I rush and always tell myself I'll fix them later. It's never about accusing anyone. It's just about peace of mind, or at least, that's what I thought back then. When she asked for the jacket, she promised everything. Just one night. A work event. No food, no smoke. She'd hang it properly. She'd bring it back the next day. I remember holding it for a second before handing it over, smoothing the fabric, feeling that small hesitation in my chest. That instinct that whispers sometimes, but I ignored it, because saying no felt dramatic. Because she was family. Because I didn't want to be that person. The next day came, no jacket. Her message was casual, almost playful. Oh my God, I forgot. I'll bring it next week. No real apology, just an assumption that I'd be fine waiting. Next week came with another excuse. She was out of town. Busy. The replies got shorter. The tone shifted. And slowly, something uncomfortable started to grow in me. Not anger yet, confusion. That feeling where you start asking yourself if you're being annoying for even bringing it up. I waited. I reminded her again. Politely. Then again, still polite, each time. It felt like I was shrinking a little, softening my words, adding smiley faces I didn't feel just to keep the interaction light. And each time, she seemed more irritated. Like my jacket had somehow become her inconvenience. 2 weeks later, I was scrolling on my phone when my stomach dropped so suddenly I actually felt dizzy. There she was, my cousin. Wearing my jacket, styled, confident, like it belonged to her. The caption read, "New staple, obsessed." My hands went cold. I clicked into the comments even though I knew I shouldn't. People were asking where she got it, complimenting it, saying it looked expensive, and she replied, without hesitation, "Vintage find." I stared at my screen longer than I want to admit. My face felt hot, my chest felt tight, and the worst part wasn't even the lie. It was how small she made me feel for noticing it. I texted her, careful, measured, still trying to be reasonable. "Hey, that's my jacket. Can you please bring it back?" Her response came almost immediately. "Lol, it's literally just a jacket." Then came the gaslighting, smooth and confident. Maybe we had similar ones. Maybe she didn't remember borrowing it. Maybe I was making drama over nothing. That's when something inside me shifted. Because suddenly, this wasn't about forgetting. This wasn't about confusion. This was about her deciding that keeping it was easier than respecting me. That I wouldn't push hard enough. That I'd doubt myself before I'd make things uncomfortable. And for a moment, I did. I felt stupid for caring. Embarrassed for pushing. I told myself it was just fabric, just clothing. But my body knew better. My chest was tight. My jaw hurt from clenching. My thoughts kept circling the same truth. It wasn't just a jacket. It was mine, and she was acting like I was crazy for noticing. So I stopped arguing. I didn't explain myself again. I didn't defend my memory. I didn't comment on her post. I didn't escalate. I went quiet, And in that silence, something very important happened. She got comfortable. She kept wearing it, posting it, claiming it, forgetting completely that the proof was stitched into the lining the entire time. And that's when I realized something else. Sometimes the best revenge doesn't start with confrontation. Sometimes it starts with patience, with letting someone believe they've won, with waiting for the exact moment when the truth can't be denied. Because she didn't know it yet, but she was about to walk into a room full of witnesses, and I wasn't going to stop her. People think the hardest part of situations like this is the confrontation. They imagine raised voices, dramatic accusations, someone storming out. But that wasn't the hardest part for me. The hardest part was the waiting, the quiet days after I stopped replying, the nights where nothing happened on the outside, but everything felt loud inside my head. I didn't text her again. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that my reactions were what she fed on. My explanations, my politeness, my discomfort. And once I saw that, I knew silence was the only move left. But silence doesn't mean peace. It means sitting alone with thoughts you can't turn off. Every time I picked up my phone, there was that split second of dread before I opened social media. And almost every time, there it was, another photo, another story. My jacket, styled differently, worn confidently, paraded like a trophy. She wore it to coffee shops, to casual dinners, once even casually thrown over her shoulders like it was nothing special at all. And that hurt more than if she'd shown it off, because it told me something very clear. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't careful. She truly believed it was hers. Now I started questioning myself in ways that surprised me. I'd catch myself thinking, maybe I should just let it go. Maybe this really is too small to matter. Maybe holding on makes me look childish. And then my body would react before my mind could finish the thought. Tight chest, shallow breathing, that restless feeling that wouldn't let me relax. I wasn't upset because of a jacket. I was upset because someone close to me had decided my boundaries were optional. What made it worse was how normal everything else stayed. Family group chats kept buzzing. Weekend plans were discussed, jokes were made, and she participated like nothing had happened, like she hadn't taken something from me and then rewritten the story in her own favor. Seeing her name pop up on my screen made my stomach drop every time, not with anger, but with disbelief. How easily she moved on. How light she seemed, while I carried this heavy mix of frustration and self-doubt. The longer I stayed quiet, the bolder she became. I noticed it in the way she posted. The captions grew more confident, the angles more deliberate. It was like she was settling into the idea that this was permanent, that I'd back down. And the thing is, silence looks a lot like surrender to people who don't expect consequences. They mistake your restraint for weakness, your patience for permission. That's when I started noticing patterns I'd ignored before. Little memories resurfaced, times she'd borrowed makeup and never returned it, clothes that came back stained or not at all, moments where she laughed things off when someone confronted her, turning it into a joke until the other person felt silly for even bringing it up. I realized this jacket wasn't an exception. It was just the first time I'd cared enough to notice. One night, I couldn't sleep, and my mind kept drifting back to that tiny label inside the jacket. I remembered sewing it in while half watching a show, rushing the stitches because I was tired. My name, the year, nothing dramatic. At the time, it felt almost paranoid. Now it felt like instinct, like a quiet version of foresight I didn't know I had. And the thought that she was wearing that jacket around, completely unaware of what was stitched inside, gave me a strange sense of calm. Then the invitation came. My aunt was hosting a small family get-together. Nothing formal, coffee, desserts, a relaxed afternoon, the kind of event where people show up comfortable, unguarded, expecting nothing more than casual conversation. When I read the message, my heart started pounding, not with nerves, but with clarity. I didn't hope she'd wear the jacket. I knew she would. She'd grown too comfortable. And comfort makes people careless. I didn't plan a scene. I didn't rehearse arguments in the mirror. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. I just made a decision. If she chose to wear my jacket in front of me, I wasn't going to protect her lie anymore. I wasn't going to accuse. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let the truth exist where everyone could see it. The day of the gathering, I moved slowly, not nervously. Intentionally. I noticed how calm I felt, and that scared me more than anger ever had. Calm meant I'd already accepted the outcome, whatever it was. Calm meant I was done shrinking myself to keep things comfortable. When I got dressed, I looked at myself and thought how strange it was that something so small had taken up so much space in my life, and how strange it was that I finally felt ready to face it. When I walked into my aunt's house, the smell of coffee and sugar filled the air. Laughter bounced off the walls. Someone was talking too loudly. Someone else was holding a baby. And then I saw her. Across the room, sitting easily, laughing, wearing my jacket like it had always belonged to her, and in that moment, something inside me went very still. This wasn't going to be loud. This wasn't going to be messy. And it definitely wasn't going to go the way she thought it would. Before I said a single word to her, I watched her. That sounds intentional, and it was. When someone has taken something from you and then had the audacity to pretend it was always theirs, you stop seeing them as family for a moment and start seeing them as behavior, patterns, tells, confidence that's a little too practiced. My cousin sat there laughing, leaning back in her chair. My jacket wrapped comfortably around her like a second skin. She looked relaxed, safe, and that told me everything I needed to know. She didn't think I'd do anything. Not here. Not in front of everyone. I didn't approach her right away. I didn't even look at her again for a few minutes. I poured myself coffee. I greeted people. I commented on desserts. I let my body move like nothing inside me was vibrating with tension. That was important. I needed this to feel normal. Because the more normal it felt, the less prepared she'd be. Liars rely on discomfort, on awkwardness, on people wanting to smooth things over quickly. I wasn't going to give her that. The room itself was warm and familiar, the low hum of overlapping conversations, someone laughing from the kitchen, someone else talking about work drama no one really cared about. This was the last place anyone expected conflict, and that's why it was perfect. People let their guard down around family. They assume honesty, they assume safety, and my cousin was relying on that assumption more than anything else. Eventually, she noticed me. Our eyes met for just a second, not long enough for a stare down, just long enough for recognition. I saw the smallest flicker cross her face, not guilt, calculation. Then she smiled wider, louder. Her laugh got just a little bigger, like she needed to prove something, like she needed the room to believe she was completely unbothered, and I understood then that she'd already decided how this would go. She thought I'd avoid her, or pull her aside quietly, or maybe say nothing at all and go home frustrated. She didn't think I'd challenge her version of the story out in the open. So I walked over. I kept my posture relaxed, my voice light. I smiled like someone who wasn't carrying weeks of swallowed frustration. "That looks really good on you," I said, honestly neutral. "Where did you end up getting it? I love that cut." I didn't accuse. I didn't imply. I asked the kind of question people answer automatically when they think they're safe. She didn't hesitate. "That's what still sticks with me." She smiled and said it clearly, confidently, loud enough for the people closest to us to hear. "Right, I scored it ages ago. I just never wore it. Ages ago." The words landed, solid and unshaken, a full commitment to the lie. And in that moment, something inside me settled, because now it wasn't a misunderstanding. Now it wasn't forgetfulness. Now it was intentional. And that clarity felt strange, almost comforting. I nodded like I was impressed, like I believed her. "No way," I said casually. "Can I see the inside? I did a little repair on mine a while back, and I'm curious if it's the same." Her body reacted before her face did, a subtle stiffening, shoulders pulling back, her hand drifting instinctively toward the collar like muscle memory kicked in. She laughed, but it sounded wrong. "Too sharp." "Why?" she asked. Just one word, defensive, and suddenly, the energy around us shifted. Not silence yet, awareness. Conversations nearby slowed. People sense tension before they understand it. I took a small step closer, keeping my tone soft. Just curious. I said, "It's silly." And before she could stop me, before she could think of a reason to refuse without looking suspicious, I gently pinched the inner seam near the collar and flipped it open. The fabric folded back easily. There it was. The tiny cloth label. Slightly off-white, stitched a little crooked, exactly the way I always do when I rush. My first name, the year, sitting quietly where it had always been. Proof that had never raised its voice. Proof that had just been waiting. I didn't smile. I didn't gasp. I didn't say anything dramatic. I looked at it for a second, letting it exist. Then I turned to my aunt, my voice calm, almost relieved. "Oh good," I said. "It is mine. I'm so glad." I thought I lost it. The room went quiet in that very specific way family rooms do when something lands all at once. Not awkward, heavy, like everyone suddenly realized they were witnessing something real and didn't know where to put their eyes. My cousin's face flushed instantly, red creeping up her neck. Across her cheeks, she laughed too loudly, too fast. "You're embarrassing me," she said, her voice tight, eyes darting around the room, searching for support. I looked at her then. Really looked at her, and I felt no anger, just clarity. "You embarrassed yourself," I said evenly, "when you decided keeping it was easier than returning it. No yelling. No insults. Just a boundary spoken out loud for the first time." She tried to recover, tried to whisper, tried to pull me aside, tried to regain control of the situation she'd just lost. But before she could, my aunt spoke. "Why would you lie about something so small?" Disappointment weighed heavy in her voice, and that was it. That was the moment the lie fully collapsed, not because of me, because everyone saw it. I reached for the jacket, draped over the back of her chair, slipped it on, and felt that familiar weight settle on my shoulders like it always had. Then I walked back into the kitchen, poured myself more coffee, commented on dessert. Like this was the most normal thing in the world. Behind me, I heard the front door slam. And for the first time since this all started, my chest felt light. What happened next didn't explode the way people imagine moments like this should. There was no shouting match, no dramatic crying, no relatives jumping in to mediate. Instead, there was something far more powerful: stillness. The kind of stillness that forces everyone to process what they just witnessed. I stayed in the kitchen longer than necessary. Not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to feel what it was like to exist in the space after the truth had landed. And it felt different, lighter, like something heavy had finally been put down. Behind me, conversations restarted slowly, cautiously, like people were testing whether it was okay to talk again. Someone asked if anyone wanted more coffee. Someone else joked awkwardly about dessert. Life tried to move forward, but the air had changed. I could feel it. People kept glancing at me, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with understanding. They didn't need an explanation. They'd seen enough. My cousin never came back into the room. She didn't try to laugh it off. She didn't try to reframe the story. She grabbed her bag and left. The front door slamming hard enough to rattle the frame. That sound echoed through the house, sharp and final. No one followed her. No one called after her. And that silence spoke louder than anything else could have. It wasn't that people didn't care about her. It was that no one was willing to defend what they'd just seen. My aunt stood there for a moment, rubbing her temple like she had a headache, then sighed. "I don't understand why she would do that," she said quietly, not angry, just disappointed. And that word, disappointed, felt heavier than any accusation. A couple of people nodded. Someone murmured, "Yeah, that was unnecessary." No one said my name. No one asked me to explain. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't the first time my cousin had crossed a line. It was just the first time she'd been exposed so cleanly. I stayed for the rest of the gathering. That surprised even me. I didn't feel the urge to leave. I didn't feel uncomfortable. I felt grounded. I talked. I laughed when it felt real. I listened. And the jacket sat on my shoulders the way it always had, familiar and steady, like it was reminding me that I hadn't imagined any of this, that I hadn't overreacted, that I had every right to take back what was mine. The text started later that night. The first few were angry, sharp, accusatory. She said I'd blindsided her, that I'd humiliated her on purpose, that I'd made her look bad in front of everyone, when I could have handled it privately. I read them slowly, noticing what wasn't there. No apology, no acknowledgement of the lie, no recognition that she'd taken something that didn't belong to her. Every message centered her feelings, her embarrassment, her anger. Then the tone shifted. She called me petty, vindictive. She said I cared more about stuff than family. That line hit harder than I expected, because it's such a familiar tactic. When someone gets caught, they don't argue the facts, they attack your character. They try to shame you for having boundaries. They frame your self-respect as selfishness. And for a brief moment, I felt that old reflex flare up, the urge to explain, to soften, to make it easier for her to accept, but I didn't. I typed one sentence, just one. I care about basic respect. I stared at it before sending, making sure there was nothing she could twist, no emotion, no justification, just truth. I sent it. And then I put my phone down. She didn't reply. I stayed for the rest of the gathering. That surprised even me. I didn't feel the urge to leave. I didn't feel uncomfortable. I felt grounded. I talked. I laughed when it felt real. I listened. And the jacket sat on my shoulders the way it always had, familiar and steady, like it was reminding me that I hadn't imagined any of this, that I hadn't overreacted, that I had every right to take back what was mine. The text started later that night. The first few were angry, sharp, accusatory. She said I'd blindsided her, that I'd humiliated her on purpose, that I'd made her look bad in front of everyone when I could have handled it privately. I read them slowly, noticing what wasn't there. No apology, no acknowledgement of the lie, no recognition that she'd taken something that didn't belong to her. Every message centered her feelings, her embarrassment, her anger. Then the tone shifted. She called me petty, vindictive. She said I cared more about stuff than family. That line hit harder than I expected, because it's such a familiar tactic. When someone gets caught, they don't argue the facts, they attack your character. They try to shame you for having boundaries. They frame your self-respect as selfishness. And for a brief moment, I felt that old reflex flare up, the urge to explain, to soften, to make it easier for her to accept, but I didn't. I typed one sentence, just one. I care about basic respect. I stared at it before sending, making sure there was nothing she could twist, no emotion, no justification, just truth. I sent it. And then I put my phone down. She didn't reply. The days that followed were quiet in a different way, not tense, settled. Family members reached out, not to gossip, but to check in. A couple of them said variations of the same thing, that she'd borrowed things before and been careless about returning them, that she'd laughed it off when confronted, that no one had wanted to make a big deal out of it. Hearing that gave me validation, but it also made me sad, because it meant her behavior had been enabled by silence for a long time, mine included. Asterisk, for a long time after everything happened. I kept replaying it in my head, not the confrontation itself, but the version of me from before it, the version that doubted herself, the version that wondered if she was too sensitive, or reading too much into it, or making a big deal out of nothing. I realized that was the most exhausting part of all this. Not losing the jacket for a while, not being lied to, not even being dismissed, but slowly being trained to question my own reality. When someone close to you takes something that belongs to you and then denies it, they don't just steal an object. They steal certainty. They steal your confidence in your own memory. They make you hesitate before trusting your instincts the next time something feels wrong. And when everyone around you stays quiet to keep the peace, that doubt grows. Teeth, it settles in. It whispers that maybe it's easier to let things go than to stand your ground. I used to think strength meant confrontation. Loud voices, clear accusations, demands for accountability. But what I learned through all of this is that real strength is quieter than that. It's the decision not to beg for honesty, not to chase validation, not to perform pain loudly enough for others to finally take you seriously. Strength is choosing not to protect someone from the consequences of their own choices. Weeks passed, life moved on the way it always does. Family gatherings came and went. Her name was mentioned less and less. When it was usually followed by a pause, the kind that tells you people are thinking the same thing but choosing not to say it out loud. I noticed something else too. She stopped showing up the way she used to. Fewer posts, fewer appearances, less confidence in her voice when we were in the same room. She didn't look like someone who had been wronged. She looked like someone who had been unmasked. She never apologized. Not directly, not sincerely. There were vague attempts once, comments about how things got out of hand or how it wasn't meant to be a big deal, but even those felt more like damage control than accountability. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to accept scraps of remorse just to restore normalcy. I didn't need closure from her anymore. I'd already given it to myself. One afternoon, months later, I wore the jacket out again, not to prove anything, not to reclaim it, just because it was cold. And it was mine. As I walked down the street, I realized how symbolic that felt. I wasn't carrying anger anymore. I wasn't replaying arguments. I wasn't waiting for an apology that might never come. I was just living. And that, strangely enough, felt like the most complete form of revenge. Because here's the truth people don't talk about enough: revenge isn't always about making someone hurt. Sometimes it's about refusing to hurt yourself any longer. For their comfort, it's about no longer shrinking your boundaries to fit inside someone else's entitlement. It's about choosing peace over proximity, self-respect over forced harmony. I learned that people who accuse you of being dramatic when you finally speak up were benefiting from your silence. People who tell you to let it go usually mean let me keep getting away with it. And people who only love you when you're easy to take from were never loving you, they were consuming you. The jacket hangs in my closet now, same place it always did, but I see it differently. Not as something that was stolen and returned, but as a reminder that my intuition was right, that my restraint wasn't weakness, that waiting, watching, and choosing the right moment can be far more powerful than reacting immediately. And if there's one thing I hope anyone listening to this takes away, it's this: you don't owe politeness to people who disrespect you, you don't owe silence to people who lie, and you don't owe access to people who treat your boundaries like suggestions. Sometimes the most satisfying ending isn't watching someone fall apart. It's watching yourself stand taller than you ever did before without asking permission. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been made to doubt yourself by someone you trusted, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. Like the video if you believe quiet revenge hits harder, and subscribe, because these stories aren't just about revenge, they're about reclaiming yourself.